For those of you watching at home, we're going to take care of some family business and then we'll get back to you with the class, okay? You're right on time. You're totally right on time. I have a little handout if you're interested in it. It's over on that table um, of chapter 7, and it's kind of broken down. I may or may not touch some of that, but it's going to be there for you to look at and study out. My handsome assistant, Senior Pastor Craig, is handing them out to people. No, but people are going to look at you, not me. So now I have to wait another minute while he hands these things out. Well, not everything, but most things. Is it hot in here? Do we need to turn down the temperature? Comfortable? I think there's plenty. It's perfect San Diego weather. All right, Craig. So as we're studying 1 Corinthians, remember we're studying it through the lens of God's wisdom. And we will say, well, of course we're going to use God's wisdom. And I would say in response to that we would all agree that we don't always apply God's word to our lives. We know what it says, we read what it says, but we don't always apply it. And we would all agree that we can struggle to live out what we say we believe depending on how we feel on the day, is what we've said. So what we've looked at so far were situations that were known about the church. Paul is saying, I hear there's reports about you, and so we've already looked at that. Now we're going to get into the situation or issues where Corinth has written to Paul and said, can you give us some answers to some of our questions? And that's what we're going to start in chapter 7 tonight. So we're only going to work in one chapter. It's a big chapter. We're not going to cover everything in chapter 7. I'm not able to do that. If Josh was teaching, he could probably cover everything in chapter 7, but he's not, but I'm sure he'll make a comment or two. So next week we're going to cover 8, 9, and 10 together, and it's about Christian freedom and liberty and how we live in that and being wise in it, okay? So in chapter 7, we're not going to get all our questions answered concerning marriage. Like, if you want to know about marriage, go to chapter 7, 1 Corinthians. You need to look in other places in the scriptures like Ephesians 5 and other about marriage and whatnot. But be sure of this, Paul is going to answer the questions that were given to him by the church in Corinth. He's not going to answer the questions that we have about marriage, all right? But there will be application for us, okay? So what we're going to be looking at tonight is be wise about Christian marriage, even if you're not married. I think there's things in here for you. All right, so before we read the text, and we'll try and I need to get moving on this because there's a lot of material to cover. We could easily spend 4 weeks on this one chapter. There's so much material. There's a lot of questions that are going to come from the text itself that we're not even going to address. Hopefully this handout will help you steer you in that direction to get some of your answers. And we need to remember this as well. Remember what Corinth was like, the Corinth city itself, and how bad it was, and sexual immorality going on, and people were teaching them that anything to do with the flesh is bad and you should get rid of it. There's temples, there's idol worship, there's people sleeping with temple prostitutes, people influencing the Christians for bad. Lots of bad things going on in Corinth. Let's remember that. So Paul speaks to 3 different groups in this chapter, and the first group he's going to speak to is Christians who are married to Christians. Did you hear me say that? Who's he speaking to in the first section? Christians married to Christians. Let's get into the text. I'm reading the New King James Version. Now, concerning the things of which you wrote to me, it's good for a man not to touch a woman. Nevertheless, because of sexual immorality, let each man have his own wife, and let each woman have their own husband. Let the husband render to his wife the affection due her, and likewise also the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another except with consent for a time, that you may give yourself to fasting and prayer, and come together again so that Satan does not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. But I say this as a concession, not as a commandment. For I wish that all men were even as I myself. But each one has his own gift from God, one in this manner and one in another in that. But I say to the unmarried and to the widows, it is good for them if they remain even as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, let them marry. For it is better to marry than to burn with passion. Now to the married I command, yet not I, but the Lord, a wife is not to depart from her husband, but even if she does depart, let her remain unmarried, or be reconciled to her husband, and a husband is not to divorce his wife. So they have asked a particular question, and they want Paul to answer it. What do you think one of the questions may be from the reading of this text? What do you think may be one of the questions that they have asked Paul to answer? You can look at the text again. What do you think might be one of the questions?
Well, one question would be down there in verse 8, to people who are unmarried or the widows, he asking, should I stay unmarried?
Okay. Should I stay unmarried? Okay. Or should I get married? Possible question that they may be asking Paul to try and answer. Of course, we're speculating on what the question might be. Oh, maybe how many spouses can you have? Because it is Corinth after all, yes. Yeah. Here's one of the questions that I'm thinking that they might be asking is, if I don't get married or if I become single, will I be more spiritual? Okay, because I think there might be something in there. Any other possible questions that they might be asking Paul to answer? Is it better to be single or better to be married? Yeah, I think that is a possible question that they could be asking, that they're looking for an answer. Well, Corinth, again, lots of sexual immorality going on, and it was affecting the whole church, as we know. And they're asking, would it be better to completely distance yourself from all kinds of sexual-related things, even in the context of marriage? Now remember, he's speaking to Christians who are married to Christians. We also know that there were teachers that came in to teach in Corinth after Paul and Peter and Apollos left and whatnot. They were teaching that anything connected to the flesh was bad. Anything, any pleasures, any joy that you would have in the body, it's bad and you need to get rid of it. That's what they taught. So these teachers have influenced the church in some way, that they're asking questions. Well, if I'm married and I've got relationship with my wife here in the sexual arena, should I be doing that because you just told me that's all bad? So they're wanting to find some of these things out. Okay? Well, you can't have any fun. You can't have any pleasures, is what they taught. So Paul rejects that teaching. Paul's response is, because of all that's going on around you, you should marry. And you should be involved with your husband or your wife in a sexual way, so they're not tempted to find it outside of marriage, because it was rampant there. And people were, maybe Pamela's question, well, how many husbands or wives can I have? Paul's not saying you should get married just so you can get to have sex. That's not the main reason to get married. Amen?
But is it kind of there?
Well, it's definitely there. It's definitely there. Of course it is. It's right. It's there, but that's not the main reason. So, and then he goes on to say, the spouse's body doesn't belong to them, it belongs to the other. And the language used here in the New King James Version speaks of affection that's due the spouse. Don't know, what word did I say that said Siri? Was it the sex? Yeah. Oh, she definitely got that, so she heard that. She didn't pick it up. Maybe a different accent. So there's an affection that's due to the wife or to the spouse. And marriage is such an intimate bond that both husband and wives have authority over the spouse's body. It's like, this is my body, you don't get it. No, that's not the way it is. That might be the way in the world, but not in the way of the gospel. It says they're not to deprive each other except for under specific conditions for prayer and fasting, setting time aside. But then don't make that too long, because they've got needs that need to be met, and so you can come back together. So the idea behind the word deprive is the same word as defraud, and it means to cheat them. It says don't cheat them. Don't cheat them. Don't cheat your spouse. So when Paul speaks to married people, he's doing it to better their marriage. That's why he's speaking to them. And behind the words, don't deprive one another, is the truth that they belong to each other, and the two have become one flesh, and we know the texts that talk about that. It's not the worldly idea of what can I get and how quickly can I get it. That's a worldly idea. The idea is, what can I give in the context of marriage, and how can I meet your needs? You see the difference there? You see the teaching of the gospel in there? It's not, what can I get and how quickly can I get it and how can I get this person to give it to me? It's the, what can I give? How do I meet that other person's need? Can you see that? That's the opposite of how the world lives. So the Corinthians were living like the world. They weren't living up to what they said they believed. And in this they were denying each other of what they were supposed to give in the context of marriage to one another. And they were doing this with the mindset of, we're doing it so we can be more spiritual. You remember the flesh is bad and we should, that's what they were taught. And they're saying, yeah, we're going to do away with this. And a little bit longer, he'll say something else about don't divorce and whatnot. So I'm saying this because they come in saying flesh is bad, anything connected with flesh is bad, and even in the context of marriage, sex is dirty, you shouldn't be doing it. You need to be more spiritual. Or you shouldn't remain married because you can't be as spiritual, when you're married. And anyway, so thoughts, comments from this little section? Thoughts, comments coming to your mind? Before I've got a question, BJ?
So what reason would Paul have for saying it's good for the unmarried to stay unmarried if it's not for spiritual reasons?
It's good for them to stay married. I think you'll get into that and talk about their devotion to God.
So being unmarried does make you more spiritual?
I don't believe he's saying that. Later on, when he gets into the later part of the chapter, he talks about undivided attention giving. If you're, because he says, "Be like me." I wish everybody would be like me. But if you're not, that's okay too, and you haven't sinned. But you're distracted by having a spouse or children. I don't think it'd be. If you're single, you're more spiritual than a married person. I don't believe he's saying that. Annie?
Everyone was single and weren't like me because that's not, God said it's not good for them.
Okay, yeah, that's true too, yeah. But he's saying if you can be like me, do it. I don't think he's saying you're going to be more spiritual if you're single, but you don't have the worries and concerns, and I think he addresses that a little bit later on.
So you're saying like more spiritual could be different than an undivided devotion. Does it mean you're not more spiritual because you don't have to split your attention?
Yeah?
But does it mean you're more spiritual just because you don't split your attention?
No. No.
I almost wonder if Paul doesn't have a full understanding. I don't want to say Paul's not full understanding, but I don't have a full understanding. It's like, if God originally designed the family as a unit to function that way, I mean, maybe I'm thinking too small as like physical families. Maybe I need to think a bit more broadly, like church family. But I'm just saying, yes, of course, like you're concerned with your spouse and your children can definitely distract you and get away from God. But also in a lot of ways, family and spouses actually are sort of a manifestation of the gospel. And you see a lot of God's truth in this
Mm-hmm.
unfolding in the family. So I don't quite understand how he's kind of been couching it as, well, it's really just a distraction. Don't let that take you away from the real thing. When there's a lot of real gospel stuff happening in families.
Yeah. I don't think he's saying that if I'm single, I'm more spiritual. The people who are married are not as spiritual as I am. Or if I'm single, I'm not living out what I'm supposed to live out. And I may not be grasping what you're communicating either. Can somebody help me out in what Annie's saying?
Well, I understand what you're saying too. She's saying it's contradicting from what God said.
Okay. What Paul is communicating right now is contradicting what God said. Well, then we're not understanding what Paul said clearly, right?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
It sound like Genesis.
Okay,
Right.
yeah.
Possibly we're misunderstanding what Paul is saying.
Okay, well, we probably are.
Do you think what he's saying is specific just to his community?
Well, he is addressing Corinth for sure.
We can't necessarily broadly apply it to all mankind.
Earlier on, I said at the start, he's definitely speaking to Corinth, and there may be some application to us, but he's answering questions to Corinth. I said that just before you came in.
Like family's a distraction that's better avoided, then why did God design that from the beginning?
I don't think God is the one that said that. I think Paul is the one that said that. So you see better if you remain
Yes,
as I am,
yes.
which was, we suppose was single at that point.
It seems to be the case. He may not have always been single.
So that would go back to saying that Paul's contradicting, that what Paul's saying is not necessarily lining up with what God said.
That might be the case. So, or we're not grasping what Paul's saying.
Could he
Or
be
we're-
saying that it's not a sin to be single or wrong to be single? And it's not wrong to be married?
I think that's what he is saying.
That's kind of what I'm getting from it.
Okay.
It's just different.
Well, everyone isn't getting married.
That's true.
So otherwise, some of us might feel like God has let us down because if He made us for this purpose and now I don't have a partner,
Mm-hmm.
where is my Mr. Right, Mr.
Okay.
You know, so I think he's addressing the conditions of Corinth and trying to deal with both sets of people so that those who aren't married won't feel like they have fallen short of God's glory in any way, but that to remind them that because of their singleness they can serve Him in a more mighty way. He didn't say they would, but he was just saying that there are those of you who are single that may be able to serve Him.
Has its place in its role.
Yes, yes.
Okay. That's helpful. Pam, you have your hand up?
So I think of it a little bit differently because that's just how I am. I used to work at Fort Lee, and I used to do when the soldiers or service members would come in, we'd get them processed. And one soldier told me one time if I was supposed to have a spouse, the Army would issue me one. And the thinking is, when I'm doing whatever I'm doing, whether I'm a ranger or I'm just mortuary services or whatever the case may be, I need to focus on the mission. And if I have a spouse or a child I'm worried about getting back home or how they're doing, it's going to take my concentration away from my military mission. Not to say that there's not a lot of great services or families that do things to support service members, but in this particular soldier's mind, it would be detrimental to his primary mission, which is being a soldier.
Yeah.
So that's how I thought of it when he said that, you know, for him, think about
He had a very specific.
I'm not
mission
trying to
from
be
God.
Paul,
Yeah.
so, but if I was trying to be Paul,
Yeah.
it would be beneficial, especially if I keep getting put in jail, not to have family, not to worry about what's going on with my spouse or my children or my grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense too. I got Josh. You got your hand up for Kevin. Kevin.
I was just going to say, when you look at verse 6 and 7, I think that kind of, that explains the whole contradicting God. I mean, Paul says, as a concession, not a command. I say this, then he says specifically, I wish.
Okay.
I think it's really important to take this out of us reading it in the Bible for a second, and remember this is a letter that he's writing to a church.
Yep.
Yes, Paul is inspired, but like, whenever you're talking to someone, it's okay occasionally to say something that's like, you know what, I wish it was like this because of her exact point.
Yes.
Paul wishes everybody was like him because his whole goal is to spread the gospel as fast as possible, and to her point, you can't do that. But there are other gifts that are better served when you have a family, when you have a support system around you. So to me, the scripture kind of like, he's not contradicting God.
Yes.
He's just giving his own personal
Yes.
feelings on the matter.
Josh.
Well, I was going to say two things with Kevin, and I think of Mrs. Ellis.
Yes.
That one, which is, if you read, Paul gives his opinion, then he says, God says, but here's my next opinion. So he
Yep.
does that. But then, and I hope I'm not getting ahead of you,
It's fine if you do.
he actually gives an answer later on in the chapter.
Oh.
In verse 29 and following, where Paul asks,
because think of what Paul's thinking in 29 and following. He says, God's coming back really quick. The time is short. And we're in troublesome times, going back to what Kevin was elaborating on. It's, he's not expecting everyone to be on earth much longer. And so if you can control yourself, be about the work of God, because we got to reap the harvest in as quickly as possible. If you can't, then it's okay to get married.
Yes, it does make sense. Thank you for sharing that. Here's a question that you just need to ponder. We don't have time. It's already 10 after. Single or married, how can I honor God in the way I live? Single or married, how can I honor God in the way that I live? The next section, he's talking, group 2, he's talking to Christians who are married to non-Christians. Let's read the text. Verse 12, but to the rest, I, not the Lord, say, if any brother has a wife who does not believe and she's willing to live with him, let him not divorce her. And a woman who has a husband who does not believe, if he's willing to live with her, let her not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Otherwise your children would be unclean, but now they are holy. But if the unbeliever departs, let him depart. A brother or sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God has called us to peace. For how do you know, O wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, O husband, whether you'll save your wife? But as God has distributed to each one, as the Lord has called each one, so let him walk. And so I ordain in all the churches. Was anyone called while circumcised? Let him not be uncircumcised. Was anyone called while uncircumcised? Let him not be circumcised. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing, but keeping the commandments of God is what matters. Let each one remain in the same calling in which he was called. Were you called while a slave? Do not be concerned about it, but if you can be made free, rather use it. For he who is called in the Lord while a slave is the Lord's freedman. Likewise, he who is called while free is Christ's slave. You were bought at a price. Do not become slaves of man. Brethren, let each one remain with God in the state in which he was called. That I'm thinking NIV as I'm reading it, but I'm reading the New King James. Give me some quick observations from this section, please. Quick observations.
Saying that if the husband, if the wife is a Christian, she's married to a non-Christian, just don't divorce her. Pray for him, and hopefully he'll come around.
Okay.
That's what he's saying.
Okay. He's saying if the unbeliever wants to leave, let them go. Yeah. But if they want to remain in the marriage, you stay in the marriage. So some Christians in Corinth were married before they became Christians. So they're asking the question, should we remain married to someone who's not a Christian? Again, they're being influenced by the false teachers who have come in and said, all the flesh is bad and you need to distance yourself and get rid of it. And Paul responds to that and says, stay married if the non-Christian wants to stay married. But then there's this language of sanctified in here, the word sanctified. It doesn't mean that the Christian husband, because he's Christian, that the unbelieving wife is now saved because she's married to a Christian. It doesn't mean that. It means that they have a better chance to become Christians. They've got a good Christian influence in the home. The blessing of God is over the house and in the house. It doesn't mean they're saved because they're a Christian. We might be confused with that word sanctified. And then as Josh pointed out, he says, I, not the Lord, meaning that Paul hasn't found any teaching of Jesus on the matter where he can say, Jesus taught this. He can't find that, so he uses his authority as an apostle and speaks wise counsel. All right? So what seems to be happening at Corinth, where some people were wanting to change their circumstances by finding another spouse. And Paul says if you're married to an unbeliever and they want to stay married, then stay married to the person. They might be thinking, well, now that I'm a Christian, wouldn't it be better to be married to a Christian because we'd be pulling in the same direction? And he said, well, you were married before you became a Christian. You need to stay in this situation unless the unbeliever wants to leave, and just do that, okay? The Christian is not to initiate finding another spouse if they're married to a non-Christian, that is. So what Paul says to do is stay in the situation you were in when you met Jesus, because there's benefit for everybody in the relationship. But if the non-Christian wants to go, let them go. Any thoughts about this? Because I've got a question for us. Here's something that came to mind as I worked with this text. It's about making decisions. There's a lot of F's in the text. How do we make decisions? So let me ask you the question, or two parts of a question. How do you normally make decisions? And does that decision making align with the way God's Word says we need to make decisions using God's wisdom? How do you normally make decisions? And you flip a coin, okay?
Have you ever prayed and flipped?
Prayed and flipped.
I mean, seriously.
I'm praying for heads.
I mean, there's apostles that basically pray and flip. We're
Okay.
gonna pray, draw some straw, you know what I mean? That's what it is, pray and flip. Ask the Spirit to lead it. We're gonna,
That's how we are to make decisions.
I don't think that's an unbiblical way to do it.
Okay, pray and flip.
It's Bible. It's
I didn't
Bible.
say that one. No,
Okay.
I was joking.
You were joking,
Between that and praying and
but he's
drawing
taking it.
straws.
Okay,
It's biblical.
okay,
It's very biblical.
all right. Lots,
That's what I'm saying. It's the same thing. It's
all
the same
right.
thing. They pray and they cast lots.
Okay.
What's the difference?
How do you make decisions, and does that align up with the way we should make decisions from God's Word? You look at all the information. Hopefully God will give you the wisdom to make a godly decision. How do you make decisions? And does that align with the way God says we should make decisions?
The Word.
Finding the answers.
It has to
Okay.
line with the Word.
Okay.
To the Word of God. Or in line with the Word of God.
Okay. So you make decisions based on what the Word of God says, is what you're saying? Okay.
I think I would add that, because sometimes there's decisions that are really difficult that we have to make, and maybe we don't quite fully understand what Scripture says on it. And so I think something that I've done in my life that's served me well is when you have those and you're struggling with that decision, going to the right people. You've got shepherds, you've got ministers, you've got Christians that are mature around you. Go and seek their input.
So seeking out wise counsel would be how you make decisions. Anyone else add on to that? What's been said? Prayer.
At least three parts right there.
Prayer and flip.
I mean, you have prayer.
Yes,
wise
yeah,
counsel,
prayer, yeah.
You have the Word.
Okay. Prayer, wise counsel, and the
you
Word.
have peace
And
after you pray.
and then you'll have peace
If you have peace after you pray.
if you have peace after you pray. Okay? Would you add anything on to what Craig has said and what others have said? How do you normally make decisions, and does it align with what the Word of God says? The third group that Paul speaks to in this chapter is to single Christians or unmarried Christians. Verse 25. Now concerning virgins I have no commandment from the Lord, yet I give judgment as one whom the Lord in His mercy has made trustworthy. I suppose therefore that it is good, because of the present distress, that it is good for a man to remain as he is. Are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be loosed. Are you loosed from a wife? Do not seek a wife. But even if you do marry, you have not sinned. And if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. Nevertheless, such will have trouble in the flesh, but I would spare you. But this I say, brethren, the time is short, so that from now on even those who have had wives should be as though they have none, those who weep as though they did not weep, those who rejoice as though they did not rejoice, those who buy as though they did not possess, and those who use this world are not misusing it. For the form of this world is passing away, but I want you to be without care. He who is unmarried cares for the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord, but he who is married cares about the things of the world, how he may please his wife. There is a difference between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried woman cares about the things of the Lord, that she may be holy in both body and spirit. But she who is married cares about the things of the world, how she may please her husband. And this I say for your own profit, not that I may put a leash on you, but for what is proper, and that you may serve the Lord without distraction. But if any man thinks he is behaving improperly toward his virgin, if she is past the flower of youth, and thus it must be, let him do what he wishes. He does not sin, let them marry. Nevertheless, he who stands steadfast in his heart, having no necessity, but has power over his own will, and has so determined in his heart that he will keep his virgin, does well. So then, he who gives her in marriage does well, but he who does not give her in marriage does better. A wife is bound by law as long as her husband lives, but if her husband dies, she is at liberty to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. But she is happier if she remains as she is, according to my judgment, and I also think I have the Spirit of God. I believe that Paul in this section is talking about undistracted devotion. I think I've already touched on that a little bit. So the reality is, and depending on what our perspective is, we can view singleness as a negative thing. And I believe Paul is saying you should see it as a positive thing. And another reality that we have in life is that the Christian life is a tough life. Life in general is tough, isn't it? And so added onto this, the Christian life and just living life, add into that mix a spouse, add into that mix children. And you got to make decisions, not just based on you now. It's how's this going to be best for my family or my children? And it's something needs to be considered that maybe a different perspective than yours. And then adding on to this as well, in the times that we do live in, many families are child-centered, meaning that the family operates around what the child wants. You know, if the child has sports to go to or child activities, that those things will come before spiritual activities. And I'd be right in saying that. With a wealth of experience in youth ministry for close to 30 years, seeing that all acted out, that we say, yes, we're Christians, but then sometimes my family's and my kids' interests come before spiritual matters, and I think that's worth considering too. So those who are married here, I've got a question for us. Without being too negative, what blessings do single or unmarried people have that they may not see? Let me say that again, okay? Married people, without being too negative, what blessings do single or unmarried people have that they may not be able to see?
Freedom.
Freedom.
Come and go as you please, do as you wish. With freedom comes that mobility that Paul had to do, right? Because it's not even just coming and going from one home that you pick up and easily,
Go to another city or something like that.
years in prison,
Okay.
like,
Or spent several years in prison because of the gospel. Okay. What blessings do single people have, married people, that the single people may not see?
Time for meditation
Time for meditation?
on God's word.
Okay.
Billy, I would say a strong faith that is your own.
A strong faith that's your own?
Just speaking personally, I'm always confused by Paul saying that if you're single, you're going to be more focused and more devoted. I feel like me personally, my faith is stronger because I'm married, because
Yeah.
I have a Christian spouse.
Yeah.
I'm very impressed by single people who maintain their faith, don't become self-absorbed, selfish people, but they are able to continue to focus their energies on the Christian life.
A great observation and a great blessing, BJ. Thank you for sharing that.
It could be this perhaps that you don't have to be concerned or worry. I know you're not supposed to worry, about your spouse because you're saying you just worry about yourself and take care of your own life. You don't have to be concerned or care about others like your spouse or your children if you're single.
Okay.
So it's like perhaps and maybe that's something that like my concern is my wife and my children.
Yes.
So I have me and then my wife and my
Mm-hmm.
children. You know what I mean? It's like, but if I'm just single, it's just me that I have to take care of.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of what Josh was talking about too.
Along those lines too, with the boldness for the gospel, and she was talking about like the military mission. If you're going to be bold, you know that there may be consequences in your mission. It's going to impact you. You're not worrying about, am I going to leave
Okay.
my spouse with nobody after this?
Okay.
If, I'm going into unknown territory.
So a blessing of singleness is that you've got more of a boldness because you're not really concerned about others around you. Okay. It's about, okay.
If I get killed, he goes, so what?
Okay.
Belong to the Lord, go to heaven, but take that father away from children and wife, that's a bigger deal.
Okay. All right. Anyone else add on to this?
If you're not married, you have fewer responsibilities.
Okay.
That's basically it. You got kids, you gotta deal with them. You got the financial burden.
Okay. So you've got less responsibilities, and that's a blessing. Okay. You don't have the risk of your spouse or children becoming an idol to you.
Child-centric.
Okay, yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Good. Kevin, were you going to say something?
Responsibilities for a family and a wife. I think one of the big benefits is you can invest a lot in your other Christian brothers and sisters because you have more time to, if you want to go and spend a bunch of time to connect with, one of your brothers and sisters, you don't also have that responsibility to invest in your wife, in your kids, and so you have all this extra time that you can put towards other people.
You've got extra time.
It's not really the case with us. but
Okay.
we have kids or anything,
Okay.
we just kinda hang
But you've got extra time to influence people, your brothers and sisters. Okay, that's a blessing. Thank you. Anybody else add on to that?
Trying to figure out all this extra time I'm supposed to have.
Yeah. Can anybody help Pamela with time management?
The Lord took it all already. He's giving it up.
Tell me where all this extra time I have.
Anyone else? You don't have to pick up anybody else's dirty stuff? Okay.
Dirty socks.
Dirty socks? Yeah, there you go. Just pick up your own dirty socks. Anyone else? Anyone? What about single people? What would you say the blessings are? Would you add on anything from the married observations?
Well, when I was younger, I used to always think that married people looked tired, especially parents.
Okay. Ain't that the truth?
They are.
So you're saying you're less tired?
Oh, no, I
Okay.
definitely,
Okay.
I sleep 4 hours, 5 hours a night, so
Okay.
I sleep well, but they look more tired.
Okay.
At least maybe it's like by your own choice, right? I mean, yes, we chose to have kids, so once your parents, but then you kind of like, you don't choose that they wake up at 2 a.m.
Yes. Yeah, you wouldn't choose that.
My cousin tells me all the time now.
Single people have more hair. Yeah. Single people have more hair. Ivory. Yeah, he's rubbing his hair.
You're not single.
Single people, would you add anything in to the blessings that maybe hasn't been touched on? The whole question was married people, what are the blessings that the single people can't see? And now the question is now on the single people, what blessings would they say they have because they are single? I think that's what I said. I need to listen to the tape again. Then. Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought. That's what I thought.
I agree with what you said. I mean, I think about all the mission trips I've been on.
Yeah?
If I was married and had kids, I'd probably, well, I also think, children should go on mission trips, that's a whole other thing. But I wouldn't have been able to do it probably if I had, somewhere at home.
Yeah.
I like to travel. I haven't done that in a long time, but traveling, I do a lot. It'd be nice to have a handy person at the house.
Yeah.
I watched that happen in my father's life because my mom died very early.
Mm-hmm.
He was alone after that, and he just went all over the place. I mean, he went to Ukraine, to Africa, did all kinds of mission stuff because he's like, he would never have taken my mother with him.
Yeah.
But when he was single, different man.
Yeah.
You can stay out as late as you want. Bother you. Can go shopping. Midnight, whatever.
Thinking of the video you sent me.
Absolutely.
You can stay up as late as you want. You can sleep on the couch if you want.
Play your music
Okay.
loud.
Play. Yeah. So, there's a financial. All right. Let's try and bring it in. We've got maybe 1 minute. BJ's going to say something pretty powerful and spiritual. There's a.
Financial aspect where if you're single, you're not having to pay for other people's expenses.
Okay.
Decide
Okay.
for yourself how to spend that money.
Yeah. I think there's a real. That's pretty real.
You could have a Mustang if you wanted
It's,
to.
yeah, you could have a
Convertible, maybe.
convertible.
If you're single, you could have those.
A laid back.
Yeah. But now the son gets to drive it too, so anyway.
Now he has a Mercedes.
Bringing it back, let me wrap this up in 1 minute. So Paul's covered a lot of material in this particular chapter. He speaks to those who are married, whether they're married to a Christian or they're married to an unbeliever. They are to remain married unless one of them, the non-Christian, wants to leave. They're not to deprive each other sexually, which would lead to temptation. Those who are not married should consider the blessing of singleness because of this undistracted devotion. But if they do marry, they haven't sinned. Because there's so much material, and I'm confident we could stay in this chapter for weeks, looking at different things and combing a lot, but we don't have the time to do that. This little handout may help you. No, it will help you. Not may, it will help you as you walk through it to answer probably some of the questions that you had. I think this chapter talks about the freedoms that we have as Christians. I believe it teaches us about decisions that we make that may just influence us as individuals or a spouse and kids, and we should use God's wisdom. And I think we need to be responsible to God and walk the truths of the gospel that we find in this chapter. And making about decisions that will affect the kingdom. And think, if I do this as a single person or a married person, how will this advance the kingdom? I think it's in there as well. Somebody want the last word? Going.
He glazed over it, but big words for me, only in the Lord.
Only in the Lord. Marry only in the Lord.
Like
That could be a session by itself. Who should we marry? Can we marry non-Christians? Is it wise to do that? I think that could be a session in and of itself. Anything else? Chapters 8, 9, and 10. We're going to cover it next week. It's talking about Christian liberty and freedom. So, thank you. And I'll see you next week. Now we can all breathe when we get outside.